Today's daf we're going to be learning is Avodah Zarah daf Lamed Aleph. It's the daf for Shabbat. We're going to get started with the topic of back to Yain Nesach. So now we're going to differentiate between three different types of wines from Gentiles and what the halacha is in each case. And this is Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera's position. We're going to start with the bottom of Lamed Amud Bet. Amar Rabbi Asi, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Shlosha yenoten. Yain Nesach, okay, there's three different types. Yain Nesach, that's wine that was offered as a libation to idols. Asur b'hana'a, u'mitamei tum'ah chamura b'kazayit. So it's forbidden to benefit from at all, meaning you can't eat it yourself, you can't sell it, gain any benefit whatsoever. And, right, it's what we call Avodah Zarah, it was used for Avodah Zarah worship. And mitamei tum'ah chamura b'kazayit. Okay, so Rashi explains what does this mean, and there's a debate about this, but Rashi says it means Masa ve'oel kimet. Okay, because itkish tikrovet avodah kochavim lemet. Right, this is what we call a tikrovet avodah kochavim. It was worshipped up as to the idols, and therefore it's like a dead body. Okay, the rabbis learned we're going to treat this like a dead body, which means that it has a tumah chamura, high level impurity, passes on impurity to other things as if it was a dead body. Stam yenam. Asur b'hana'ah u'mitamei tumat mashkin berevi'it. So stam yenam, we're going to go with Rashi here on the tumat mashkin. There's a bit of a debate about this as well. Stam yenam is wine that comes from a Gentile. We don't know, was it offered to idol worship or was it not? So how do we treat this? It's forbidden to benefit from. Okay, so again, you can't get any benefit whatsoever besides, right, you can't drink it and can't benefit from it. But it doesn't have the same level of impurity. Okay, it's mitame tumat mashkin be revi'id. Okay, if it's the size of a revi'id, then it's mitame tumat mashkin. Now, the way tumat mashkin works, it doesn't mean it itself is impure, just like the previous. But we said this carries a level of impurity like a dead body. No, what it means is if this wine were to come in contact with a creepy crawler creature, okay, something that's tamei, it becomes it conducts tuma. Okay, like all the liquids. Okay, there's 7 liquids. Yad Shachadam is the reference to the 7 liquids that are also machshir l'kabel tumah. They conduct impurity. And what it means is a mashka actually raises up the level of impurity. So no matter what touches the liquid, whether it's a rishon, whether it's an av, whether it's a sheni, it creates the impurity level goes back up to a rishon or down to a rishon, whatever it is. Okay, so that's Rashi. Mitame tumat ochlinu mashkin, but kit torat mashkin tumat sheretz. Sheino mitame adam bekelim ala ochlinu mashkin. Okay, it's a rishon, which means it only transfers impurity to food and drink. Okay, and if it's a revi, then it can transfer the tumah, it can conduct tumah in that way. It's a bit of a problem because in other cases we see the tumat mashkin doesn't require a revi, and that's why some of the commentaries explain otherwise. But we'll leave it at that for now. Then we have a third category. So first category, asur b'hana'ah, obviously asur b'shtiyah, can't drink it, can't benefit, and it has this high level of impurity. The stam yenam, which we're not sure was actually worshipped as a libation, but it does come from a Gentile, right? This is to prevent us from drinking yain nesach. It's also forbidden to benefit, and it carries impurity like a regular liquid, though. It's not, in and of itself, it's not impure. But what if I give a Gentile my wine to watch? Asur b'shtiyah mutar b'hana'ah. So I'm not allowed to drink it when I take it back. But I am permitted to benefit from. Okay? So now we're going to have to figure out this halacha. Why exactly is this? So, the hatznan. So now they ask a question. They say, wait a minute. How can I, right? It's actually strange. Either they switched it and then I should be forbidden to benefit from also because it could be theirs and it's stam yenam, or it's mine, in which case I should be allowed to drink it, right? So, right, it's this in between where we're going to say, well, don't drink it, but you can benefit. So now the Gemara is going to question it actually from a Mishnah in Demai, which is all about safek, were masro taken or not. If I gave my produce to a Gentile to watch, so we're going to treat these as if they were potentially the Gentiles for Maaser and Shemitah. Okay, what does this mean? What it means is we're concerned that the Gentiles swap the produce. So for example, let's talk about the relevance for Maaser. If I already tied the produce and then I gave it to the Gentile to watch and the Gentile switched the produce with his own or her own, then I have to take the tithes again. Because as I have no idea if they switched it or not. But if they switched it, perhaps then it's untithed produce. Now this would actually only follow the position of those who say that a Gentile's produce is obligated to tithe in Israel, right? The fact that it's owned by a Gentile doesn't mean it's not obligated in Trumot Masro, because it comes from the land and the land is sanctified. So if you say it comes from the land and we're worried, let's say for example of Trumot Masro, that I would have to tithe the produce again because there's a concern, and there's an assumption that the Gentiles switched it, and therefore I have to take the tithes again. So why in our case are we not concerned? We're maybe only a little concerned, but if we're really concerned, then it should be a halach of stam yenam, and it should be forbidden to benefit from. To which the Gemara answers, Kigon shichelo keren zavit. The case must be where the Gentile gave you a corner in their home and then said that you can't, right? No one can come over here. They lock it up, seal it. Okay, it's in an area that's locked. Okay, that's what Rashi says. So either the wine is sealed, or you had, we're going to talk about seals soon, or you had a key and no one else had the key. And then that's why we're only going to forbid it for you to drink. And that's probably like from the area of Zarah, better off, not to allow it. It might allow other things. But we're not going to forbid you to get hana because we can make an assumption that it wasn't switched. Now again, if, right, in the case of mafki perotav, it wasn't in a keren zavit, and that's why you have to be concerned that the Gentiles switched it with the Gentiles' produce. But if you designated a corner in the Gentiles' house, locked it up, and that's our case, the yayin, your own wine that you gave to a Gentile to watch, we don't have to worry about it. So then they asked the question we said before, well then it should be permitted to drink. So now we get back to that question. So why can't you drink it? If it was locked up, it should be pretty clear you can drink it. Well, Dehar Rabbi Yochanan ikla leparvad. We're going to see. Rabbi Yochanan we're going to have a whole story now. Rabbi Yochanan comes to Parvad, which is the place where Bar Kapara was from. Bar Kapara was in that in-between generation between Tanaim and Amoraim. Amar, Klum yesh mishnat Bar Kapara. Says, is there anything Bar Kapara taught? I want to get some of his Torah. And where did he go? To the place where Bar Kapara was from. Tamale Rabbi Nachum Demin Parvad. So Rabbi Nachum from Parvad comes and says, Hamafkid yeno etzel ovei kochavim mutar b'shtiyah. So he said, if you give your wine to a Gentile to watch, it's permitted to drink. So this is what Bar Kapara said. Kari alei makom shipol ha'etz sham yehu. Okay, so now they say where the tree falls, that's where the fruits are. Okay, meaning, right, Sham Yehu Sakadatach Ela. So what he really meant to say was, right, the place where the tree fell, where the person died, that's where you're going to find the person. Okay, so where did I do? I went to Bar Kapara's home to learn from him, right, to his hometown. So the Gemara says, Sham Yehu Sakadatach. What do you mean? Of course he's not there. He's dead. How could you say the place where the person died, that's where you're going to find him? So obviously they meant Ela Sham Yehu Perotav. That's where you're going to reap, the perot of what they taught. Okay, anyway, what was this all brought for? Well, what this was brought for is to say that should it be permitted to eat? Because according to Bar Kapara, mafkid yeno etzel ovei kochavim mutar b'shtiyah. So now we're back, right? Besides, it doesn't make sense why we're going to permit it for hana'ah but not to drink. Here we have a clear source that says that you can actually drink it. So now we're going to say, Lo kasha hara b'eliezer hara banan. Okay, now we're going to say this actually is a Tanaitic debate. Okay, sorry, I think I skipped Amar Rabbi Zarah. Rabbi Zarah answers that Lo kasha hara b'eliezer hara banan. Ditanya. Okay, now we're going to see why our source said that it was right. This Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera said it's forbidden to drink. Okay, and now we're going to see what this is based on. Because again, we've already determined that because it's permitted to benefit, Gentiles are usually suspect that they're going to move your things around, but not if it were sealed or locked. So if it were locked and sealed, then you're allowed to drink it. But according to Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera, you're allowed to drink it, but you're not allowed to benefit. But you can't drink it, but you can benefit. I just flipped that. You are allowed to drink, you can't benefit. And according to Bar Kapara, you're allowed to drink it. So how do we resolve this? Rabbi Zarah lo kasha hara b'eliezer hara banan. Ditanya. Okay, one is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, one is the rabbi's opinion. Ditanya. Echad alokach ve'echad asocher. We're now going to see it's a Tanaitic debate, and each one's going to line up. If you rent or buy a house in the courtyard of a Gentile, so that means the Gentile can go in and out. And you filled it with wine. And either the seal or the key is in the hands of the Jew. Rabbi Eliezer matir. Rabbi Eliezer says this is totally permitted, and on that basis, bar kapara also permitted. V'chachamim osrim, but the rabbis say it's forbidden. Okay, the rabbis forbid a chotam because, what are we going to see? Well, a chotam is not completely reliable. Okay? Now, it's true, okay, if you look at Rashi kind of tries to get to this answer, even though it's never really directly answered, why it's forbidden to drink, but yes, permitted to benefit from. So Rashi says, Chachamim osrim la'asot kein, okay, they forbid you from doing this, but yavid sharei b'hana'ah, okay, but this is a classic, ideally you shouldn't do this because you never know what's going to happen. On the other, since it does have a seal, we're not totally concerned, and therefore will permit you to benefit. Okay, and that explains this in between. But the main reason the Gemara is bringing this right now is to tell you that there's a machlok of Rabbi Eliezer with the rabbis, and Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera follows the rabbi's position, and Bar Kapara follows Rabbi Eliezer, who has the lenient position. Once it's sealed, you don't have to worry about any monkey business, any switching of items. Amar Rabbi Chia, Bered Rabbi Chia, Bar Nachmani, Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rab. Now we're just going to see how we paskin, and there's a bunch of different versions about who said what. Either this is mentioned in the name of Rabbi Chia, etc., a name quoting other people, the son of Rabbi Chia Bar Nachmani, who said in the name of Rav Chisda, who said in the name of Rav, or Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Rav Zeri, or Rav Chisda said in the name of Zeri, or Amar Rav Chisda, okay, either which way Rav Chisda said this in the name of someone, Amar li Abba Bar Chama, okay, so somebody was quoted by Rav Chisda, Hachi Amar Zeri, okay, and in this version it's that Rav Chisda said that Abba Bar Chama told me that Zeri said, not that I say Zeri said it, but someone else told me Zeri said it. Either which way, halacha ki Rabbi Eliezer. Okay, we actually pass by the lenient opinion, which matched Bar Kapara, that once there's a seal on it, or it's locked, right, and it's in the Gentile's house but put away, or you rented the space and it's locked up, right, even though it's in the Gentile's courtyard, you're allowed to drink the wine. Okay, and obviously you can benefit from it. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Now we're going to have a machloket, Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, or maybe not exactly a machloket, but we're going to have two different versions of what they say, and that affects kind of how we understand this machloket, Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. Amar Rabbi Elazar. Okay, I don't want you to confuse Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Elazar is a student of Rabbi Yochanan, third generation Amora. Okay, that's different from, second to third generation. That's different from Rabbi Eliezer, who's a Tana. Okay, he's living in the Tanaitic time period. So we have a machloket Tanaim, Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis, and now we're going to have Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so again, it's interesting because Rabbi Elazar is the prize student of Rabbi Yochanan, and yet he disagrees, or maybe doesn't disagree. It really depends how you read this. So comes Rabbi Elazar and he says, everything is protected with one seal, except for one thing, wine. One seal does not help you with wine. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu yayin mishtamer b'chotem echad. Okay, Rabbi Yochanan says even wine protects you with one seal on it. Now the Gemara says, by the way, v'lo pligi, haki Rabbi Eliezer, haki Rabbanan. Don't think there's a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and his teacher, Rabbi Yochanan. It's just that one is holding by Rabbi Eliezer, the lenient opinion, that's Rabbi Yochanan, and the stringent opinion holds like the rabbis, that's Rabbi Elazar. Now, this is a little bit strange because, what do you mean they're not arguing? They're arguing. One holds like Rabbi Eliezer, one holds like the rabbis. What is that if not an argument? So some people say, no, it's not really an argument. In other words, they don't argue about what somebody says. They both agree that there's a machloket Tanaim, and one rules this way, one rules that way, and we don't call that a machloket. It's one way to understand it. Some people say that they don't argue, they were each just trying to explain each opinion. In other words, each one was, Rabbi Yochanan was talking according to Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Elazar was talking according to the rabbis, but they weren't talking halacha l'maaseh. They were just defining the positions. Okay, that's another way to read it. Ikeda Amre, some people say, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Hakol mishtamer b'chotam b'toch chotam, chutz min hayayin she'em mishtamer b'chotam b'toch chotam. This is a more extreme position. According to this, Rabbi Elazar says, you actually need a seal within a seal. We're going to get to soon what that means. But everything needs a seal within a seal, other than wine, which needs, which actually, according to this, a seal within a seal doesn't work. And according to most of the commentaries, according to this, Rabbi Elazar, not only does a seal within a seal not work, but nothing works for wine. Basically, don't give your wine to a Gentile, okay? Give it to a Gentile, it's a problem. Even 3 seals, nothing will work. Okay, but Rabbi Yochanan Amar, afilu yayin mishtamer b'chotam b'toch chotam. Now the Rabbi Yochanan says, no, wine, if you have to double seal, it works, not a single seal. Now, according to this position, this is a different version of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan, Chavayu kirabanan. Now, both of them hold like the rabbis. It's just let's go back to the rabbi's position. We said that if you had a key or a seal, the rabbi said it was forbade doing that. Now, what does it mean they forbade a seal? Well, maybe they permit a seal within a seal, or maybe they don't permit it at all. And therefore, they're each debating what the rabbis held. So according to this version, they actually debate within the rabbis what the rabbi's position was. Mar savar ki pligi Rabbanan alei Rabbi Eliezer b'chotam achat, v'chotam b'toch chotam shari. Rabbi Yochanan holds that the rabbis just disagree when it's 1 seal, but 2 seals for sure would be fine, which is kind of how we understood Chachamim to begin with. But Mar savar, Rabbi Elazar holds, according to the rabbis, afilu chotam b'toch chotam asrei. They didn't allow anything. When they say we forbid if it has a seal, they mean any seal. Seal within a seal doesn't make a difference. Okay. Now we want to know. Okay, so just before we're going to define what is a seal within a seal. Okay, but maybe just to review for a quick minute what we did so far in the daf to get it organized. We had the source of Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera. Okay, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera was quoted as these 3 yenot. We really wanted to focus on the one the one we end up going in depth about is the one who gives his wine to a Gentile to watch. And then it says permitted to benefit, but forbidden to drink. Why is it forbidden to drink? Doesn't that contradict this Mishnah in Demai? To which we said, oh, don't worry, the Mishnah in Demai is when the Gentile gave you a specific place. Then we assume, and as the Mishnah in Demai again wasn't talking about our case, but the Mishnah in Demai assumed that for sure the Gentile switches things. So then we said, oh no, it must be Keren Zavit, okay? So that's the first resolution. Once we say it's Keren Zavit, that contradicts another source, which actually was talking about wine, and that's the Bar Kapara source, who basically says, you're allowed to drink it as long as it's sealed, right? So then we said, sealed is allowed, sealed is not allowed, 2 different sources. One is Rabbi Eliezer who permits, one is the rabbis who don't permit. And then we saw that we paskin like Rabbi Eliezer and are lenient, that really, if it's sealed or locked up, you don't have to worry. And then we had these 2 versions of Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan who come later and have this debate about either they each are talking according to a different opinion, and one says seal within a seal works, seal doesn't work, and the other one says seal works. Okay, that was version 1. Just make sure I have that right. Sorry. According to the first version, Rabbi Elazar says it doesn't work. Right, yeah. 1 seal works according to Rabbi Yochanan, which matches Rabbi Eliezer, and Rabbi Elazar says 1 seal doesn't work, and that matches the rabbis. But then we had another position, which is perhaps the rabbis either permit a seal within a seal, or maybe they don't even permit a seal within a seal. Maybe they don't permit anything at all. And maybe that was the debate between Rabbi Elazar and Rabbi Yochanan. Now we get to what is a seal within a seal. What's a double seal? So now we just want to talk practical. Hechigami chotam b'toch chotam, amar Rava, agda depuma dechavita, shrika v'chatima. So you have an agan, that's like a cover, okay, or another vessel, which is really like a cover, on top of the barrel. Shrika, it's got clay on it, and chatima, and you write like your name etched into the clay. Okay, so it's number 1, sealed with clay, which makes it very hard to open, and it's got an identifiable mark that if you open the seal, it will undo the mark, okay, it'll undo the writing. So it's got a double seal on it, okay, that's a chotam within a chotam. It's interesting here, you would have thought it's just the same thing twice. It's not. It's 2 different types of seals. One is closing it shut, and the other is an identifying, some sort of writing on it, which makes it uniquely yours, that will be ruined if you open it up. Okay, that's the position of chotam b'toch chotam. So he says, right, that will work. That's havi chotam b'toch chotam. V'i lo. Okay, but if not, it won't work. Now they say dikula umahadek habechotam betoch chotam. Okay, if you have a basket and you put the basket, you have a cover that's sealed. Okay, this is what you would have thought a double is. And then you put a basket on it and it sits right into place there. Okay, it sticks onto the clay as you had clay sealing the top, the cover. Then you put a basket on top right into the clay, so it also is sealed shut. And that's a double one. That's another one. That's also habechotam betoch chotam. But lo mahadeg lo habechotam betoch chotam. But if that basket on top is just sitting there but could be easily taken off, then it's not considered a double seal because obviously, right, it's easy to open. The harder it is to open, the more it makes it a seal within a seal. Another case, nod bediskia, if you have a flask, okay, a leather flask, inside a bag with other things in it, or maybe not, chatimat piv lemata habechotam betoch chotam. If the opening of the flask is face down, okay, and the sack is open at the top, but when you open it, you can't access the opening of the flask until you turn it upside down. So again, you have the satchel that's closed and then that's sealed, and you have the flask that's sealed, but the flask is upside down in the sealed bag, satchel, that will work. Piv lemala, but if the opening is right at the top, then you can basically open the bag and then open the flask, and then you can get to it pretty easily. That's lo habechotam betoch chotam. That's not a double seal. B'chikayev pume legav v'tzir v'chatim habechotam betoch chotam. One other way you could do it is you have a flask, and if you bend down the opening of it and tie it again, so you have the opening is tied, and then you fold down the top of the flask and have another tie around it where it's sealed, then that's a double seal, because again, it makes it much, much harder to open, and then we don't think that the Gentile is going to bother to open that kind of seal. So those are three cases of chotam betoch chotam. Tanu Rabbanan. Now we talk about Cutim. Okay, we're going to talk about different populations today. So we have the Gentile population where we're concerned, number one, that they might switch stuff around, unless it's either double sealed or maybe one seal, locked, right? We had different opinions, Rabbi Eliezer, the rabbis, different ways of how to understand them. Then we're now going to go to Cutim. Now, Cutim are people who don't worship idols. Okay, they were Samaritans. Okay, they took upon the mitzvah, but they have a bit of a different interpretation than us, and they were known to not be so careful about certain mitzvah. So the concern is, if I get wine from a Gentile, maybe the Gentile got wine from, if I get wine from a Kuti, maybe the Kuti got wine from a Gentile. And there's a concern. So therefore, it says here, Tanu Rabbanan in a Braita, it says, Barishona hayu ombrim yain shel ein kushi asur mipnei birat srika. Okay, Ein Kushi was a place where Cutim lived, and it was near this city called Birat Srika. And there were a lot of Gentiles. So because of the proximity of the cities, there was a concern that their wine might have come from Gentiles. And the same with two other cities. Vishal Barkata Asur Mipnei Kfar Parshai. Again, Barkata, a Kuti city, because of its proximity to Kfar Parshai. Vishal Zagdor Asur Mipnei Kfar Shalim. And Zagdor, another Kuti city, was forbidden because of Kfar Shalim, which was nearby and was a Gentile city. That's what they said at first. Chazru Lamar, but then they changed their mind and they said, you know what? It really depends. Chaviyot ptuchot asurot, stumot mutarot. Again, back to the sealed. If it was open, it's forbidden. But if they were sealed, it's permitted. Now, the Gemara wants to know, meikara my suffer, v'levasaf my suffer. Why did they change their mind? Why in the beginning did they think it was forbidden? At the end, they permitted it in a particular manner. Well, meikara suffer ein kuti makpid al magav ovet kochavim. Loshna ptuchot, loshna stumot. In the beginning, we just figured the Cutim don't care at all. Doesn't matter whether it's sealed or not sealed, right? They let them open it. Doesn't matter. But livasof saver, afterwards the rabbis realized, kilo kapid aptuchot, astumo makpid kapid. Then they realized that the Cutim, the Shomronim, the Samaritans, were concerned about the sealed ones. They were very careful about them. Why were they careful? So the reason it seems they were careful is because they wanted to sell to Jews, and they knew that the Jews wouldn't buy from them so it was a business decision. Because people were therefore careful about the sealed ones, then we don't have to worry about it. Okay? And this is very fascinating because due to business practices, we know that the Cutim knew that they couldn't sell to Jews unless they protected them. So if it was sealed, then we don't have to worry that they let the Gentiles touch it because they were careful not to let Gentiles get in contact with their wine that was sealed. The open stuff, they don't usually sell anyway, or the Jews also would never buy from them open stuff, so there's nothing to worry about. Okay? Or in other words, not there's nothing to worry about, that it was obvious that you couldn't buy those. So now they say, wait a minute, stumot mutarot? On what basis do you say stumot mutarot? That the seal ones are fine. We're going to see now from a different source that they're not fine. Ramini. From a different source it says, Hasholech chavit shel yain, turning out a bet. If you send a barrel of wine, biyad kuti, v'shel tzir v'shel morayis, biyad ovei kochavim. Okay, so either you send a barrel of wine in the hands of a kuti to a fellow Jew, or you send this fish brine in the hands of an ovei kochavim. Now, tzir and morayis. So tzir was this fish brine that there was a concern maybe it came from non-kosher fish. And morayis would be a concern that maybe they would add wine to the morayis. It was something that was more expensive than wine, and therefore it was a brine that was more expensive than wine. There was a concern they were going to add a little wine to it, and the wine would be problematic. So now they say, if you're sending those things to a gent through a kuti to your fellow Jew, im makir chotamo v'stumo mutal, if the Jew who receives the package recognizes the seal, okay, and the insignia and the seal, then it's permitted. Vim lav, asur. But if not, it's not permitted. Because even though there's a seal is not enough. You need to be able to recognize the seal and know that it wasn't tampered with. Right? You have to check if it's tampered. This is all about, like drugs, for example. You always make sure they weren't tampered with. Right? There's a concern somebody put something in. Right? So there's certain things that we buy only if they're sealed shut. If they're not sealed, we're worried. So now they say it's not enough to be sealed, but it has to be sealed and you recognize the seal because maybe someone tampered with it. Amar Rabbi Zarah. So now that contradicts what we just said. We just said that once, right, they originally were concerned for the Cutim. Once they realized that once it's sealed is enough. You didn't need the level that this source says of recognizing the seal and knowing it wasn't tampered with. So Amar Rabbi Zarah lo kasha kam be'ir kam b'derech. Depends whether you're buying in the city or you're buying on the path. Now, if the kuti is on the path, well, the kuti can do anything he wants on the path because if you're sending the kuti on a path outside the city, even if they're going, let's say, to the next door city, but they're going through the path where nobody is, there's a big concern they're going to switch things. The kuti wants to sell to a Jew. Now, the kuti knows that people are watching, but not where nobody's watching. As the Jews want to make sure they can buy from these people, so they do checks on them. But nobody's checking what they're doing on the path. If it's in the city, then you can assume the kuti is keeping to the rules because someone's looking over the kuti's shoulder. But not when you're on a derech and nobody's looking. So Matkefla Rabbi Yirmiyah. Now remember, the way things work, the fields were outside the city. The paths were probably in between the fields to the cities or beyond the fields, but also between the fields and the city. There weren't a lot of people, and the city is the city. So now they say, wait a minute. B'derech, so Matkefla Rabbi Yirmiyah. Midi hanach de'ir lo b'derech atu. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, wait a minute. To get, right, the wine had to have gone from the fields to the city at some point and went through a path. So the kuti at the earlier stage could have swapped things, right? And had a Gentile come in contact and no one would ever know. So even if you're buying it in the city, how do we allow it? If it's sealed, that doesn't mean that it wasn't touched by a Gentile, then maybe they offered it up as libation to their gods. Ela Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, Bein Hagitot Shaninu. Okay, Bein Hagitot is where the wine press is, but he doesn't mean a physical location. He means in the time period where the wine's being made, where there, Kevan de Kule Alma Apche Mirtad. There, everybody's working there, and everybody's passing by, and everybody's going through. It's very popular, the roads in those days, because people are all making wine. And therefore, the kuti won't do anything with the wine. And that's when stumot are permitted, and you don't need to recognize the seal. But if you're going, right, and that's why in the city it's going to be permitted, because when they moved it from the wine press to the city, there were lots of people there. But if you're in the fields, and went in the fields when nobody was around, then it will be a problem. And unless you recognize the seal, we're not going to allow it. Amar, hashti ichazili mifsiduli. Right, so again, this explains why the why the kuti is scared. Because he said, if they see me, right, I'm going to lose all this money because I'm not going to be able to sell it to the Jews. And therefore, he'll be concerned. And therefore, when there's people around, there's no concern this will happen. Itmar. Now we're going to move on to another topic, which is until now we've been talking about wine. Okay, we started with wine. That's, we talked about both yenesech, actual yenesech. We talked about stam yenam, and then we talked about a Jew's wine that the Jew gives the Gentile to watch, and that was the majority of our topic for today, dealing with different elements of that. Then we're gonna move on now, and then we went to the Kuti. Okay, what's the status of a Kuti here? Are we concerned if we buy from a Kuti, the Kuti actually allowed the Gentile to touch? Originally they did, then they stopped because they realized the Cutim were careful, but then we decided, well, it's only in certain circumstances the Cutim were careful. Now we talk about beer. Okay, generally we don't think beer is an issue, but we're going to see that according to this source, there's some issues with beer. Itmar. Why did they forbid the beer of Gentiles? So we're going to have two possible reasons. Rami bar Chama Amar Rabbi Yitzchak mishum chatanut. Rav Nachman Amar mishum giloi. Right. Now, Rabbi Yitzchak says it's because we're worried about interactions. If you sit and drink beer together, you might come to marry Gentiles, okay? It just increases relationships just like wine does. But Rav Nachman said it's because of Giloi, because they're not careful about the halacha of leaving things exposed and having snakes put their venom inside, as we discussed previously. So now they want to know, a Giloi demai, what kind of Giloi are we worried about here? Ilem a Giloi de naziata, if you're talking about Giloi in the vat, ananami begalina, we also keep our vats open while the beer is getting made. We're not worried about venom then, because we do that. Ela de chavita, when it's in the barrel, ananami begalina, we also leave our barrels open, so we're not worried about that either. Lo tzricha ba'atra de matzlumaya. It's a place where, before they put the wine, part of the process they pour the water, getting confused with my words today, they put the water, they leave the water to become clear, okay, let everything settle, and then they put the water into the beer in the process of making the beer. So now when they let that water sit for a while, there was a concern for Giloi. The Jews would be careful to keep it covered, the Gentiles wouldn't, and that's why you can't have their beer. Okay, this is all, by the way, only if we take the track of Giloi. If we're in the track of Chatnut, it's going to be a problem no matter what. But now they're saying the Giloi we're concerned is only in a place where they use the water and they let it sit for a while to become clear. Well, then they say, okay, if the whole problem is Giloi, then we have a separate problem, which is there's certain cases where there's no problem of Giloi. And that's, for example, Elameata Yashan Tishrei. If it's aged beer, it should be fine. Why? And we know it's not, and then that doesn't make sense that the reason is Giloi. It should be Amar Rabbi Chanina. Yashan mutal, em nichol yashnan. Hichmitz mutar, em nichol achmitz. There's two situations where you don't have to worry about Giloi, because if the snake had put its venom in there, it never would have aged properly. The venom ruins that. Also, it wouldn't turn to vinegar, or hichmitz, some people think just means it won't become wine. The ones that get to that later stage, if the concern for Giloi was earlier, it would never get to that later stage if a snake had put its venom in. And therefore, Yashan should be permitted. So why is it not? Well, the answer, that's not a problem. Yashan atu chadash. They just made a gzera. Didn't forbid the new because of the old. Okay, Rav Papa, mafikin le alabava de chanuta v'shate. So now we're going to see two rabbis. First Rav Papa, then Rav Achai, who basically came up with a way to drink the beer of Gentiles. Obviously not because of Giloi, because Giloi would still be a problem, but because of Chatnut. So what did he do? They would have him, he would mefikin leila abava de chanuta. They would take it out to him outside the store, sell it to him, v'shate, and he would drink it there. Because then there's no issue of Chatnut. They're not sitting together drinking beer. Rav Achai maitu lebeite v'shate. He was more makpid. He said, I'm not going to drink it outside the store like Rav Papa did. I'm going to bring it all the way home and be as far away from them as possible, and then I'll drink my beer. So again, Rav Papa, they would bring it outside the store and he would drink it there. Rav Achai would wait till he got to his house. And obviously they're both concerned for the marriage issue. Rav Achai Avodah Yiterata, and just Rav Achai was just more careful about it. Rav Shmuel bar Bisna Ikle Lamar go on. Now we're going to take it one step further. We talked about beer of Gentiles because of either Chatnut or Giloi. Now what about Jews who are not careful about mitzvot? How do we deal with those Jews? So he got to the city Margoan, where there were Jews who were not very careful about halacha. Aitule chamra v'lo ishte. Aitule shichra v'lo ishte. Brought him wine, he wouldn't drink it. Brought him beer, he wouldn't drink it. Now bishlam chamra mishum shimtza. I get the wine, because the wine could be yei nesech. It could have been, if he's not careful about mitzvah, maybe he got the wine from a non-Jew, and that would be a problem. But shichra mishum mai, what's the issue of shichra? We're not worried about chatnut. We're not really worried about, it doesn't seem like gilo is the issue. The same mishum shimsa de shimsa. Now this is fascinating. What does that mean? We're worried that you might buy his wine. So what do we tell you? Don't even buy his beer because you might come to buy his wine. Now we don't say that by Gentiles. Nobody said that was the reason why you can't have beer. Beer maybe is an issue of chatnut and you can get around that issue. And giloy, you can maybe get around that issue, although not so clear. But if you go with chatnut, then okay, you can at least buy from the Gentile and drink it elsewhere. But if you can't buy it, right, in this case, you can't buy from him at all. We're actually, because we want to avoid, in other words, the way I understand this is, if it's a non-Jew, it's very clear his wine is forbidden. So we're not worried if we allow you to buy his beer, you'll buy his wine. But a Jew who's not careful about mitzvot, and we have to be concerned that maybe their wine came from a Gentile, you have to be careful, more careful, and not buy his beer, because you might end up buying his wine. And that's a problem. Amar Rav, Hai Shifra Da'aramai Shari. So Rav also said that the beer of a Gentile is permitted. But my son Chia shouldn't drink from there. So now, this doesn't make any sense. My nafshach, Ishare l'kulei alma shari. If it's permitted, it should be forbidden to everyone, even his son. I aser l'kulei alma aser. If it's forbidden, it should be forbidden to everybody. Why would he only forbid his son to do it? El Rav, Sarva Mishum Giluya. So now we're going to say his reason was Giloy. That's really the issue. Va'azil merora de kashuta v'kalele zihare. What happens? The kashut, the hops that they put in beer, basically is a counter to the venom. Okay, and it lowers the potency of the venom. Udelake malkele tfe. But if you're weak, it will affect you. So the venom won't affect a normal person. But if you're weak, it will affect you. And chia bari ho'il velake lo nishte. Because my son is weaker, we're not going to allow him to drink it. Okay, so there he made this. So if you're in the Giloy track, actually now we understand why Giloy is not such an issue by the beer, because the hops limit the potency of the venom, if there is venom at all. And therefore, it's okay. But not if you're weak, because if you're weak, it will affect you. Okay, next. Amar Shmuel. Kol hashchatzim yesh lahem eres shel nachash memit. Okay, so, sorry, I didn't read that right. Kol hashchatzim yesh lahem eres shel nachash memit, shel shratzim eino memit. All the shratzim have poison in them. But, okay, so Shmuel says, Amar Shmuel, all the shratzim have some sort of venom, but shel nachash memit, the snake kills. Shel shratzim eino memit, but the shratzim, the creepy crawlers, doesn't kill. Amar le Shmuel l'chiyah barav. Shmuel said to Chiyah barav, Bar Aryeh tava emalach milta. Okay, son of a lion, I'm going to tell you something. Okay, Shmuel said to the Chiyah barav, the son of Rav, he said, listen, you son of lion, because he had a lot of respect for Rav. He said, let me tell you something. Dava Amar Rav Avuch. I want to tell you something your father said. You can imagine the scene, right? He comes to him and says, listen, I want to teach you some Torah from your father. Obviously, Rav is no longer alive. Hachi Amar Avuch. This is what your father said. Hane aramai zukane. Okay, what is zukane? Rashi says nifuchim. They have big, bloated stomachs. Dahavushate giluya velo metu. They would drink right? Now, here's a really good, interesting thing. If venom, okay, before we even read this inside, if venom is poisonous and we don't drink it, but the Gentiles drink it, it doesn't make any sense. They shouldn't drink it either. This isn't a halachic thing. This is a health thing. So now he's going to say there's these Gentiles who have big bellies, okay? And they drink water that was exposed. Velo metu, but they don't die. Why is that? It says because they eat creepy crawlers, that actually makes their bodies warmer and allows them to deal with the venom. They cope with it. Maybe it makes them a little bloated, but they cope with it and it doesn't kill them. And that explains why venom is an issue for us, but not for the Gentiles. Fascinating. I don't know if there's any validity to this in a medical sense, but that's what he says. Okay, we're going to stop here and continue on this topic a little bit more into tomorrow's daf. So let's do a quick review. We started with the 3 types of wine, what the different gradations, right, and the rules are for the different kinds. We really dealt a lot more with me giving my wine to a Gentile to watch. Is 1 seal enough? Does it need 2 seals? Does machloket emoraim, and really a machloket tanaim about the whole thing. And then we went to we wanted to define what is a double seal, because I've talked about the double seals, which some people think it works, some people think it doesn't work. Right? According to the rabbis who don't allow seals, do they not allow any seals, or do they allow a double seal? Then we had this idea, the Cutim, and how we deal with the Cutim, because is there a concern, is there not concern? And again, things changed because they realized the Cutim wanted to sell to Jews and therefore kind of changed their patterns to relate to that. And then we had the issue of right, and then we had another contradictory source, who's Cutim. Once it's sealed, it doesn't necessarily mean it's okay. Well, that depends on whether it's in the city or on the path, because on the path they could do what they want and open it up, close it up, and no one would know. And that's why only if the seal is recognizable and clear it wasn't tampered with, then you can drink it. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to drink it. And then we went to this question about beer of Gentiles, perhaps two issues, Giloy and, right, the Giloy of the water and the Chatnut issue. But those we could kind of get around, okay, particularly the Chatnut issue, as long as we drink it on our own and either all the way in your house or even outside the store. Papa thought that was okay. And from there we said, however, though, non-halachic Jews who aren't careful about Yein Nesech, not only can you not drink their wine, because maybe it comes from a Gentile, you also can't drink their beer so that you don't come to drink their wine. And we finished up with this issue of the beer and how the hops basically kind of work to weaken the venom, but it's still going to be dangerous for very weak people. And on the flip side, we saw that Gentiles can handle the venom much better because of their diet, which they can eat things that we can't eat, and that helps them to cope with the venom, or, kind of limits the effects of the venom on them. And with that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everyone a Shabbat Shalom and Shavuot Tov.